Marine reacts to U.S. Marines versus U.S. Army platoon. Who'd win in that fight? By Binkov's Battlegrounds. As always, I'm going to be leaving a link to the original video channel down in the description below, so go ahead and make sure that you check them out. So, I honestly typed in U.S. Marines versus, and this is one of the ones that popped up for me. I haven't heard of this channel yet, but it had an interesting concept as far as U.S. Marines versus the U.S. Army. And it says Platoon in the title, so it's going to be Platoon based. And now I don't know exactly what is going to be taken into account as far as technically. I would assume the Army would also have is that you've got air support, you've got guns attached to you, you might have mortars, you might have assault men, you know, things of that nature. If it's just going to be strictly like, are we talking about an 0311 here? I don't know. But I mean, bear in mind again, this is just for fun, just to kind of see what would happen. I mean, obviously, you can probably understand who I think is going to win. And I'm pretty sure everyone in their own branch would probably have their own biases as well. But very curious to see kind of how this whole video plays out and just see like what exactly they're going to be taking into account. So I'm not going to talk too much more. Let's go ahead and get to the actual video. But before we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me out a lot. Hit that notification bell right there. So you're notified every time I do upload. Sometimes I'm uploading twice a day. Now working on them whenever I can and releasing them early the next day. That way when you all wake up, you're fresh in a video first thing in the morning. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see who would win in a fight between the U.S. Marines and the U.S. Army.
The US Army and the US Marine Corps have had a long-standing tradition of rivalry. Who is a better warrior, who trains harder, who shoots better. But what are the actual differences between two similar basic units of the two services?
Just before he goes any further, obviously everything that I say is going to be based on the Marine Corps side for the most part, just because as far as Army goes, I only ever talked to people from the Army in Buehring in Kuwait, and that was pretty much it. I really didn't have too much in contact with them.
And how would those differences show themselves in an actual battle? A basic infantry platoon of Marines versus a basic US Army infantry platoon. Which unit would win that firefight? Both Marines and the Army use secure comms radios. In today's wars, it's unthinkable to have your data streams exposed to eavesdropping. This video is sponsored by NordVPN, a virtual private network app which can help you enjoy similar encryption levels in your everyday internet usage. Be it on Windows, macOS, Android or iOS, NordVPN will reroute your data through their secure servers. Not only will your data be encrypted, but you can choose the location of the servers. There's over 5,000 servers in 62 countries to choose from. For example, if you're watching your favorite streaming service while on vacation in another country, simply reroute traffic to get your usual content. You can enjoy peer-to-peer sharing and use up to 6 connections at once. And Binkov viewers are getting a special offer. Go to nordvpn.com/Binkov and use the code Binkov. You will get 68% off a 2-year plan and an extra month for free. Check out their rates and their offer by clicking the link below. Let's get back to our...
Okay, before he does that, ironically enough, a lot of the people in Kuwait where I was at, the majority of the people VPN-wise used Nord. So, I mean, if you're deploying here pretty soon, use this code, man. I mean, not only that, NordVPN is pretty cheap, and they offer, like, at least from what I remember when I was using it, is that it's usually very generous in the amount of free usage it'll give you.
Our clash of platoons. The infantry platoon often has a few more troops attached to its core. Usually the totals today are around 42 Army soldiers versus 43 to 45 troops for the Marines. A few of those are medics, forward observers and such, sometimes from the battalion's artillery or medical units, or even US Navy personnel in the case of the Marines. Those are not considered to be core members of a platoon, but they are indispensable and are pretty much de facto platoon members. Organizational difference concerns the fire squads. The US Army platoon has 3 rifle squads, as does the Marine platoon. But the Marine squad has 13 troops each, which populate the 3 fire teams that are part of their squad. The US Army squads have 2 fire teams, populated by a total of 9 troops.
I mean, then again, these numbers can always change. I mean, I don't know if with the Army, but like ideally you would have 13. in each squad, and then the fire team. Then you have a fire team leader as well. A lot of the times these numbers are more like in the single digits, like 8 or 9, just because there's usually an amount of people that they don't have, and that's usually because when people barely get to the fleet, that's when you see the kind of mass exodus, in a sense, of people who are trying to get out for by any. But I'm not saying for specific means. Obviously, if you've been in the fleet, you might know what I'm talking about. I don't want to put that out there though, but there's a lot of people that try to get out as soon as they get to the fleet because they realize like, hey, this wasn't really for them. They don't like it, but obviously the Marine Corps has already put a certain amount of money to training you, and they're gonna try to get their money's worth. But I mean, obviously, some people claim certain things and then try to get out that way, you know. And so yeah, so this number is usually down in the 8 or 9s, but yeah, ideally 13. I didn't know about the Army though, with just the 2 fire teams. That's I mean, I would assume they would have more because technically they have a lot more people than us.
So now we're at 33 versus 43 or so troops. So there's one big difference yet unmentioned. The Marines platoon doesn't have any organic heavy weapons, like mid-caliber machine guns or dedicated anti-tank detachments. Those detachment units do often operate with the Marines platoon in a regular combat setting, but they're actually part of the weapons platoon of the Marine company. On the other hand, the US Army platoon does have organic assets of such kind, so it has an additional 9-man squad, the weapons squad.
Technically, we did have. I mean, God, it's been a while. It's been like what, almost 2 years now, like a year and a half since I've been out. And for example, the SAW or the 249, we would have that. We would have one in each squad, at least when I was in our platoon. Now I know it's been phased out, but we have used it in the past, and I guess like that was supposed to be our heavy, but obviously they switched it out for. I heard that the reason we stopped using it was because they were trying to get everybody M27 IARs, which I've heard has been transitioning even like to right now, as far as I know. And that's because, I mean, obviously, if you've ever handled a 249, those shits jam every single time. At a certain point, it practically becomes fucking bolt action where you're consistently wrecking that shit back. So, but I mean, not saying that we would. I mean, not me personally want to use it because obviously. I was never a fan of carrying any things that was extra or heavy. So, I mean, but we definitely did, at least at one point.
Both sides can have further, usually company-level troops attached for added firepower. But without those, the US Army platoon is now complete at 42 troops. One could say the additional few troops ought to tip the scale, no? Certainly, if our tactical situation has both groups approaching each other from a few miles out, even one pair of eyes more could theoretically result in one side spotting the other earlier, and thus gaining some initiative to dictate the battle. Both the Marines and the US Army have been test fielding some drones on the platoon and even squad level. But so far neither side has managed to field such drones to average platoons. The Army seems to be set on Black Hornet drones for the future, while the Marines seem to have decided in favor of the Instant Eye quadcopter. But today neither side uses such tech in most of its combat platoons. There are other factors in play as well. Let's look at how individual weapons compare. The composition and equipment of a platoon is often in flux. The Marines have, for example, decided to make their platoons even bigger in the future, with 15-member fire squads. But that's not yet applicable as a widespread measure, so it will be disregarded.
15-man squads. I don't necessarily see that happening. I mean, this video did come out a couple months ago, back in 2020 September, but I don't see that happening just because the amount of people that's needed for it. So I mean, I've always heard. I don't know how true it is, but like the people in the military is supposed to be like the 1%, and then the Marine Corps is also considered the 1% of the 1%. So I don't think that would be possible number-wise.
Another transformation that will be taken into account is the Marines' conversion to the M27 assault rifle. While not all combat platoon units have fully switched to it, many have, so in this scenario the M27 is the regular infantry rifle within the Marines platoon.
So it's finally now the standard. I mean, because I already knew that they were transitioning from the because they went from like M16 to M4 to M27. We first time I ever saw this gun was specifically in SOI, where we actually got to like disassemble it a little bit because it was definitely a lot different than the actual M4 in terms of taking it apart just because it's a free floating barrel. So if I could remember correctly, as far as like taking it apart and everything, because for me, I've always heard that another reason was that these guns don't get as dirty as easy, like carbon and all that. And take out this little pin right here, break it down shotgun style, take out the bolt carrier, yeah, and you're gonna use that to take off this pin right here. It's gonna help take off this guard, if I remember. And then I believe there's like a little piston somewhere in there that's like has like a little spring on it that you really gotta make sure you don't lose it, because as soon as you take it apart, it has a tendency to kind of, you know. And yeah, I mean, you got your SDO, you got your RMR. Don't even tell me what they stand for, because I don't remember. I remember ruggedized miniature reflex. Don't remember what the SDO acronym was supposed to be for.
The M27 Infantry automatic rifle is roughly similar to the previous Marine rifle, the M4 carbine, which the US Army still uses. It's based on the Heckler & Koch 416 design, which gives it some advantages over the US Army's M4A1 rifle. Basically, the Marine's rifle has a 2-inch longer barrel, it's more precise, and its firing mechanism is more reliable. Some tests suggest up to 3 times more rounds shot before a malfunction compared to the M4. Of course, the Army's own tests claim the M4A1 is only slightly less reliable than the M27. A drawback exists as well, it's 25% heavier, so over a long mission or in a sprint, the soldier carrying it might...
Real quick, let me just rewind that a little bit. All right, so obviously the weights, yeah, and for some reason when you pick up an M4, especially when I went from an M16 to an M4, and it was like a slick one, it didn't have a 203 attachment on it or anything else, it's very light. It felt like a toy almost because it was so light. But you definitely feel a weight difference, even though even like right here, I don't even remember the weights, but you could just see that it's those extra 2 pounds right here can make a difference. And I remember this desert anywhere. This is somewhere in 29 Palms. God damn, dude. So many horrible times just sweating in this. You know, I'm not even going to get into it. Let's just keep going.
Soldier carrying it might get tired a tad quicker. The sight on both is basically the same, though the Marines variant offers a tad less magnification. A curious decision given that it's coupled with a rifle that's naturally more precise. The M27, in the hands of a good marksman, can hit point targets out to 600 meters, which is roughly 100 meters farther than the Army's M4's effective range. But that's on a shooting range. Such distances may not be applicable in a battle. Your average battlefield is
Real quick, before you get into more, I always knew that the M4 and M16 was supposed to be 500 meters for a point target. For 600 meters, honestly, I don't even remember being told if it was the same for the IAR for as an M4 as far as point range. I mean, I knew the max the area target was 800 meters because I feel like that was always rifle wise for us was always kind of solid. But I don't think I ever remember hearing a point target for it. But I could have just not been paying attention and being a fucking shitbag.
Bound to have at least some bushes, trees, a slope, or even a house obstructing at least part of the view, and the enemy would be shooting back. US Army tests have shown actual precision at long ranges is not that good, which is why the US Army shooting qualifications are done to distances of up to 300 meters. Rarely have in the history of wars regular infantrymen had to use their rifles over longer distances. Peculiarly, Marines do train at even longer distances. Their qualifications include shooting at 200, 300 and 500 yards. But comparing two different training methods is not a clear-cut task. The Marines' rifle qualification tests use known distances to well-marked targets, and Marines have more time to aim a shot on average. US Army training is a bit more representative of possible real-world shooting situations.
We do have a table though where we do shoot unknown distance, but yeah, I mean honestly for the most part we do know the distance, so that's also kind of why when we do go on a range, and I'm not talking shit about my company, but when we would I forgot what range it was, but we were in a trench at the very end and we had to shoot, and these little green Ivans go down as soon as you shoot them, right? A lot of times they're not going down, and just because people are not aiming correctly, just because I feel like that's one thing that the Marine Corps should really focus a lot more on as well, in my opinion, as far as like unknown distances, because it seems like that's what he's saying that the Army does, which I feel like that would definitely give them an edge up, because Although I haven't been in combat, I feel like that would be a big issue as well. Like you're never gonna really know the distance. You're gonna have to judge it based off of the. I believe it was. You wanted to get the little, like the little T section on the side. I believe it was you wanted to get it on the shoulders. If I remember correctly, I mean, it's been a while.
With harder target recognition. Pretty much the entire Marine platoon is standardized at using the M27 rifle, and that includes the automatic rifleman roles. Basically, the same rifle is also providing fire support in the fire squad. The only outlier might be the potential presence of designated marksmen in a fire squad. Those use the M38 rifle, basically a variant of the M27. The biggest difference is a more powerful scope with up to 8 times magnification. The US Army fireteam roster is more varied. Most fireteam members have the M4A1 carbine, yes, but one soldier has the M249 light machine gun. It's a 5.56mm weapon, the same caliber as the other rifles, but it's a heavier weapon. It usually uses a 200-round belt, and in that configuration it weighs a whopping 22 pounds.
So I'm pretty sure I said this earlier as well. The Marines have used this. I believe they've early, at least for my platoon, they phased it out for us in favor of the M27, which honestly, my peers when we were new were considered boots. They didn't mind. Because hell, it's a lot. It's like what, more than twice the weight, and plus you got to carry the ammo as well.
Interestingly, the Marines did use the same weapon in their fire teams, but have since switched to the M27 for automatic.
Bro, I'm telling you, when I get these little things right,
fire as well. The main reason was precisely the added weight and some reliability issues. Regular fire teams also have some explosive weapons on both sides. Each army fire team has one grenadier using a 40mm grenade launcher. That's 6 grenadiers for the army, compared to 9 grenadiers for the Marines, as they have more fire teams. Those 40mm grenade launchers can deliver imprecise fire to almost 400 yards away.
I'm trying to remember if I've seen it. I mean, I've definitely seen this, but I don't remember ever seeing it implemented at all in the Marine Corps, at least in our platoon. And for us, we would always have a 203, which is basically another detachment on the rifle, which to me always seemed like a better idea. Technically, yeah, it's a piece of gear that attaches on, but the fact that it's attached, you don't have to worry about having like a second thing, right? I mean, it's the same thing. You can only load one round into each one. And we also had 2 people in each platoon have a Mark 32, which is those, I guess you want to call it like the automatic grenade launcher that chambers. I don't know if the Marine Corps has switched to this, possibly, since I've been out, but...
Or they could deliver precise hits on individual enemy troops at some 160 yards away. The US Army fire team usually carries some basic unguided anti-armor weapons, such as the AT-4 rocket-propelled grenades. Usually one fire team can be expected to carry 1 or 2 such disposable launchers. The Marines, up to a few years ago, were expected to carry an Mk153 launcher and some rockets. Their weapon was heavier and more cumbersome, but was multi-use. Realistic line of sight range for both is a few hundred meters, perhaps 500 meters at most, but the Marines seem to be transforming their platoon, so the upper echelon units, such as the Marine Company...
Yeah, I mean, as far as the small, those are more what the assaultmen deal with. And technically they're part of weapons company, so they would be attached. But I remember him saying that they wouldn't be counted because they're not in it organically. And I mean, honestly, for us, we used, at least when I was in, we were using laws and AT4s as well. I don't even think I touched the small. I think we were told like the misfire procedures, the conditions and all that, but never really touched it.
Company are distributing the AT weapons on a case-by-case basis. So it might be that the average Marine platoon today, whisked away into battle with no prior prep time, doesn't even carry any such AT weapons. Both weapons were designed primarily against bunkers and medium armored vehicles. Their warheads could inflict injuries even to enemies standing a few feet away. Still, they're not really an effective way to deal with infantry. Both do have high explosive warhead variants, but it's unlikely the average platoon would carry more than a couple of those. The 40mm grenade launchers would be more useful most of the time. And now we come to the big guns. The US Army Weapons Squad. The Marines have nothing of the sort in their platoon organically. The Army platoon has two M240 machine guns. That's a 7.62mm machine gun, and a fairly heavy one at that. But the heavy round and the big barrel does mean its effective range reaches 900 yards. The gun would be quite useful for laying down suppressive fire even at such long distances. The downside is of course that every 100 rounds weighs 7 pounds, so the mobility of those weapon teams is not comparable to the Marines' mobility.
Also, real quick on that, I mean, shit, I didn't know. I mean, I was honestly thinking that they were going to have 240s, and that would be a very big disadvantage for the Marines in this case.
The two anti-armor teams have soldiers with M4 carbines, which might be used a lot in this particular situation, but otherwise their main weapon is either a javelin-guided anti-tank missile or a Carl Gustaf M3 recoilless rifle. The latter is an unguided weapon, but the rounds could reach 1400 yards. The Carl Gustaf has a wide variety of round options, including warheads for clearing out infantry behind cover. Again, how many of such warheads would usually be carried by an unbriefed platoon is questionable. One might expect one AT team within the weapons squad to use the Carl Gustaf, while the other would use the Javelin missile. The Javelin is guided, very precise, up to 2500 meters away, but its current warhead is an anti-armor warhead, so unless it lands right next to an enemy, it might not even wound them. There is a multi-purpose warhead being developed, but its deliveries to the US Army will start only later this year and continue for some time until they're standard. A new sighting system will also enable longer range engagements, but those are currently not available to the platoon in our scenario. Javelin's existing thermal targeting unit is sensitive enough that US platoons have been known to use it to confirm their targets at night or masked in smoke, rather than rely just on their other equipment. That might give the army guys some edge if there's a night fight. There's hardly been a word about non-gunnery training though. But how does one quantify training and keep it objective? Today the army training is longer than Marines training.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, and in any case, bro, this guy has got knowledge to the T and has a lot of very correct information as well. I guess now, I mean, strictly considering from a I guess you want to call it tech-wise or firepower, it definitely seems like the Army has a way better advantage. But then again, also it doesn't take away from the Marines because they've also been very known to do a whole lot with a lot less. As of right now, I'm still thinking it's kind of in the middle. I mean, I feel like anyone can take it. I feel like it's also going to come down to actually like the training, how he's about to talk about right now, tactics, small unit leadership, things of that nature.
The basic training course for the Army is 10 weeks versus 13 weeks for the Marines. Once they start gunnery training, both have some 6 weeks remaining. But the US Army trains more hours per week.
Alright, so they got, so the 10 weeks of basic, 13 weeks of hell, as they call it. That is interesting. 12 weeks, almost a whole another month from our 2 months. Obviously, if you were MCT, you were four weeks.
Average than the Marines. The Marines also do some specific water training, like a full week of just swimming training in various conditions. The physical fitness tests are also not directly comparable, as some tests feature crunches, the other tests feature sit-ups, and so on. Marines have to run for longer, but with more time allowed. There is no real palpable difference that would give either side an edge in modern combat with firearms. The Army guys have recently started receiving a longer infantry school training. They went from a 4-week course to basically a 12-week course. The Marines have 8 weeks of such specialized training. That's additional experience for specific jobs, maneuvering as a team, grenade usage, navigation or role-specific tasks like mortar usage, vehicle usage, etc. Of course, with the Army's change being so recent, most of its units have not gone through such training. On the field, the two formations would be similarly poised to detect each other, but the Marines may have a very slight edge.
Alright, so real quick, and I think this is the most paused video I've ever done, but just moments like this, I mean, this reminded me of Syria when we did that live fire. Yeah, I think I could talk about it right now. I mean, or here, I can keep it very vague. We essentially just shot a fuckload of rounds that night, and we did that for supposed to be 2 days, ended up being 4, which is very mind crushing because we were literally set to leave in a few hours, but then they say, hey, you're gonna stay an extra 2 days for specific reasons.
They're slightly more mobile as a unit as they have fewer heavy weapons, and they have a few more pairs of eyes. The army platoon may however have a slight edge at night due to their Javelin 80 missile sensor. The mobility edge isn't that great though. Besides the weapons, Marines and army men carry all sorts of stuff. 70 pounds of various equipment per person is a very usual load, with 100 pounds also being common. For example, just the body armor, which is quite comparable for both sides, weighs 30 pounds when fully equipped. That means it has plates capable of defeating 5.56 mil rounds. Still, most of the body is only lightly protected, so the overall weight advantage for the Marines, compared to army guys having to lug the heavy weapons around, would be perhaps 10 or so percent. Being slightly more mobile, the Marines might be able to evade a night fight if they deem it would not be advantageous to their position. Certainly, if one side manages to detect the other and remains itself undetected, that in itself would be half the battle. The side with greater situational awareness would be able to devise a plan of attack and position itself favorably around the enemy. Potentially, depending on the surroundings, even perform some sort of an ambush. But the recon edge is fairly minor. In almost as many cases, the army unit will spot the Marines at the same time, and the army does have some longer reach weapons. In a real environment, it would really be more of a game of hide and seek, one side trying to outmaneuver the other, one side running away if needed until they get to a favorable position. But let's say our scenario forces combat on both sides. They can't run away, they have to press on. The army's 2 mid-caliber machine guns would be quite handy there, laying suppressive fire, possibly pinning down and preventing a whole fire team of Marines from moving, each. The army's light machine guns would also present a minor advantage in such a scenario over the Marines' M27, and the precise, guided one shot from the Javelin might result in an insta-kill, which might be problematic for the Marines if the person killed is, say, a squad leader. The Carl Gustaf is also...
Just real quick, I mean, me being a little biased, but if a squad leader were to go down, as far as the way things were always coming up, it would always... we were always under the reasoning of you should always know the job of 2 guys above you, so that way if one of them goes down, boom, next person immediately stands in. But damn, dude, this dude's taking so many things into account, and I know that even just with the scenario itself, there's so many things that would be needed to take account of. And then again, if this was a one-time thing, it could still be very if and and, just because if this was a simulation, right, that was going through hundreds and thousands of multiple times, kind of like in the Deadliest Warrior back in the day, I don't know how it would end up, but I mean, it would probably be very close, as in my opinion so far.
a pretty good force multiplier, as it can outrange the Marines' weapons, and it should have at least 1 high explosive warhead within the platoon. So the army guys might get some early kills, before the distance between the 2 sides goes down to 600 or 700 yards. Both sides might have or are even likely to have a few marksmen in their platoons. Some army marksmen use the regular M4A1, but with better optics, while some use the M110 rifle, which is a 7.62mm caliber weapon. Those are somewhat better than even the M38 marksman rifles the Marines would use, as they also have a slightly larger and greater magnification scope. So the army platoon might bring down a few more Marines, before the Marines manage to close in enough. Now, all this is very terrain dependent. If we are talking about a perfectly flat meadow, the Marines would face an uphill battle, so to say. The machine guns would pin them down, but if there are bushes, a house and some slopes, those machine guns might not be able to fully utilize their reach. Of course, that also applies to the advantage the Marines might have once they get to 500 yards away from the army guys. Yes, they train to shoot at 500 yards away and their rifles are more precise, but if the shot isn't clear, that advantage is lost. If the US Army presses on, at some 350 meters away, the Marines would have another advantage: their 940mm grenade launchers within the platoon, compared to the Army's 6. Each of those 40mm grenades could be quite deadly. Each grenadier would likely carry half a dozen grenades, but sometimes even more. and a well-aimed shot might wound several enemy troops at once. The body armor both sides use would be quite useful in preventing a lot of grenade kills, as they're good against such small fragments. Still, an incapacitated person, even if the wound is not lethal, is often a liability. Both sides use the M320 grenade launcher, which is more precise than the old M203 under-barrel launcher. The M320 was designed to be used either as an under-barrel launcher or as a standalone weapon, with a buttstock for added support. If the fighting distances manage to stay at 500 yards and the army's machine guns are somehow neutralized, the Marines would likely win. But in reality, the machine guns would be just as much of an edge at that range as the Marines' standard issue rifles and their marksmanship. There would also be smoke grenades used, and it's quite possible many clear shots at long ranges would not be applicable. If the fight somehow manages to degenerate to extremely short ranges, perhaps due to terrain and surroundings, the Marines do have one small advantage. They still train for bayonet use. The army guys, while their knives can be used as a bayonet, do not train for that type of combat anymore. The end result of a fight is thus inconclusive. Depending on many factors, one side might be better than the other.
Just like you said, depending on many factors, and obviously the bayonet part, they say that we train with them. We don't really do. I mean, at least when I was in, probably a while ago, but we used them in boot camp. I don't believe we used them in SOI, and we used little fake ones. Not even fake ones, but like just these little sticks that simulate a rifle, and they were supposed to be like for like a bayonet training, but it wasn't as heavy as a lot of people would think. And obviously, I don't know how they would be able to close distance considering the current time, but I like the fact that he's putting like this whole thing seems very unbiased, so it's very good to just see kind of like how it looks, everything on paper, because obviously, you know, if this actually did happen, you never know what's going to happen, and it's going to depend on the individual people as well, tactics, whether you got a good fucking platoon commander, platoon sergeant, you know, squad leaders, fire team leaders, things of that nature. A lot of that also comes into effect, and I like the fact that he's really trying to cover as much as possible.
Flatlands would favor the army platoon. Terrain with some middling amount of obstacles would favor neither side, though as one gets closer, the Marines' indirect fire grenade launcher edge might prevail, and up close, exchanging fire at just 100 yards away, it would mostly be about numbers, both in troops and shots per minute. Marines have more troops in their unit, but the army guys may still be able to lay down more bullets. With even part of one side's squads being suppressed, the effective numerical advantage may change. After all this, one might have a feeling Binkov favors the US Army just ever so slightly. In a forced battle, that's perhaps so, like winning 55 of 100 fights. But a forced attack is not realistic. If Marines can run away and keep outmaneuvering their slightly less mobile enemy, then their chances improve, especially if there is a river around. The Marines training in water environment may further help them outmaneuver the opponent. And what about a situation where the exact same number of troops faces each other with similar weapons? Again, the result might be slightly different, but this video showed the actual consequences would be quite similar. That's why the final result is more or less a draw.
Alright, now let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. Now, I just like the fact the amount of information he had, very exact, and it was very based on also not just the gear that is available, but also like kind of the tactics or the type of background training that's actually implemented within the two branches. Now, at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. You know, we might come from a different branch, but still, same team at the end of the day. And I like the fact that he was very just unbiased, like completely. He just looked at literally the straight facts, what to take into account. And as far as you mentioned about this being a forced attack, obviously, yeah, I mean, you could definitely see pros and cons for either side, and I'm not taking away from either side as well. For example, so long as your guys aren't dying and you're doing a tactical retreat and then flanking around, kind of like he was mentioning at the end, you know, there's always things that could happen, and especially like with the Marine Corps, we do a lot of flanking elements, at least from the time when I was in. And now, as far as I can't say too much about the Army because I wasn't in the Army. So if somebody was, I'd be very intrigued to kind of see like what your own little personal experience was in accordance to tactics, in accordance to just some things that you think that the Marines may have not have done, or maybe something that you guys did that the Marines also did. So with the Marines, it was very individual action. You've got to be able to think on your own. You got to be able to take a leadership spot on the spot. I mean, it happened to me a few times where I was GP or general population, and then and I was a senior at the time, and at the time I didn't really care for a leadership role. I was just kind of trying to do my time and get out, right? But then all of a sudden we're going through a range. One of our guys is feeling insanely sick. He's throwing up. Feels like he's about to heat case. Squad, like I was really cool with the squad leader as well, and he was like, "Hey, Martinez, you're taking over his team." And then I had already known what the plan was supposed to be. I knew exactly what we had to do, so I was like, "Got it, cool." That was it, right? Immediately, just take over that position. So really knowing those two jobs above you, and being able to just really think on the spot, being able to adapt. As far as the Marines go, and it could also be dependent because for us, we focus more on a desert environment. You got people who go on mules or those big ships, and then they do different things as well. I believe some of the things they also do, I think it was Camp Pendleton. I forgot. Yeah, I want to say it was them that they do jungle training, I want to say, but I'm not 100% sure. But for us, it was mainly just desert type environments, working with ospreys. Tracks kind of, but not too much. But yeah, and then at the end he said it's going to be dependent on the terrain, what is the reason why this would happen, and again also just with how the leaders are, because a good leader can turn a ship platoon into a fucking phenomenal one. And really also depending on that, depending on the people, depending on what platoon you would be looking at. If you're looking at an all-star type platoon, then yeah, it would be very interesting. But when he said they would be 55 on the Army, it's like, you know what, at this point with everything that was said, everything that was really gone through, and it's kind of just an on paper type thing, you never know what's going to happen in real life. I could definitely see it going either way for me personally, but then again, that's me just being probably biased for the Marine Corps. I mean, obviously my thing has always been that the Marine Corps, and also just in general, that the Marine Corps has done a whole lot with a whole lot less. But then again, what if they were to go against someone who would do a whole lot, who have a whole lot, if that made sense. So, I mean, bottom line, at the end of the day, I said it before, I'm just glad that we're all on the same team. So if you made it this far, here's a little snippet about me or a little information on myself. And now I know what you all might say about this, especially if you're in the Marine Corps right now, that as soon as I had gotten out, I did contemplate going into the Army for a short while. But then I realized that anything military related, I just didn't want to deal with that. Mainly because there's just so much bullshit that goes on, and there's things that are just ridiculous and not necessary, but mainly just annoying as well, and sleep schedule. But I saw though that a lot of my peers who did want to continue in the military obviously transitioned to the Army. I mean, for them, from what I've been hearing, is that it's a lot better. It's a lot more, not relaxed necessarily, but to them they feel better overall. They feel better physically, they feel better mentally. They don't have someone that's, at least from their own experience currently, that they don't have anybody that's trying to fuck them over, at least where they're at, which can happen in the Marine Corps, especially if you get like some piece of shit like staff sergeant kind of dude, or some officer, specifically lieutenants, that if you kind of cross them, they will do anything and everything they can in their power. And this isn't me thinking like, oh, just because you're in a position of power that you're going to become corrupt. Like, no. These guys will literally go out of their way to fuck with you. And then that turns into a whole mess, whole fiasco. But yeah, I mean, I actually thought about joining the Army. I mean, I've had little thoughts here and there, but then other than that, it's like, you know what? I'm not a fan of just that type of lifestyle. I would prefer to just be doing this and also doing personal training, just because that's always been my kind of core focus. But I mean, you never know. I'm glad that I chose the branch I did, just because I met some fucking incredible people in my life that I'm still really close to today. So grateful for them, grateful for the Marine Corps in that aspect. But I mean, besides that, that's gonna go ahead and do it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me a lot. Hit that dislike button if you didn't like it. It helps me improve the channel. If you're curious to see what's coming up next, it's the description down below. You're going to see a list of about 5 videos. Top to bottom is going to be how I view them. But until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.